For this tutorial, I'm using the Adjust the Anchor Point project file. You can find that project file with the media associated with this tutorial. Just double-click on the project file to open it in Premiere Pro. I'm also in the Effects workspace, and you can choose and reset that workspace in the Workspaces panel. We have a sequence here with a simple background video and a square foreground graphic, and the whole thing plays for about 20 seconds. There's not much going on. I'll just play a little. And you can see we've got the waterfall playing in the background and this graphic in the foreground. This is a beautiful part of Iceland. I'm going to choose this graphic layer, which I've already trimmed out to match the duration of the video, so we can see the settings in the Effect Controls panel. If the motion heading's not expanded on your system already, then just click the disclosure triangle to see those options. Before I make any changes here, I'm going to select the motion heading in the Effect Controls panel, and this is going to allow me to do direct manipulation inside the program monitor. You see I've got these control points that I can click and drag on, and also right at the center, it's very hard to see on this graphic, I have my anchor point. Now when you look at the position controls, for example, in the Effect Controls panel, they may not make a lot of sense on first inspection. Why would the position for this graphic be 960 and 540? This is the x-axis horizontally, and this is the y-axis vertically. Well, the answer is that the position is actually the position of the anchor point. I'm going to zoom in. Let's set this to 100% on this screen so that perhaps you can just about make out the anchor point right here. In fact, let me go a little bit larger and you can see it even more clearly. It's a little circle with a cross in the middle. And I wanted to show you with this particular graphic because it can sometimes be difficult to even see the anchor point, but it's very easy to move it. If I click here and drag, you'll notice, in fact, let me move it up here so you can see it more clearly. This is changing the position values, again, X and Y, horizontal and vertical, but not moving the image itself. What I've done by clicking on the anchor point is move it in relation to the graphic. I'll just undo with Control or Command Z and undo again. Now the anchor point is also used for rotation. I'm going to zoom back out to fit, and in fact let's make this a little bit larger on screen so you can see a little more clearly. If I expand the rotation settings in the Effect Controls panel and just click and start to rotate, obviously the graphic is rotating on that center point, but it's only the center at the moment. I'll just reset that, and I'm going to click on that very hard to see anchor point and move it somewhere else in the image. Let's move it up here. And now when I click the rotation setting, you can see clearly that this graphic is rotating on that new anchor point. Again, I'll just reset the rotation. You'll notice that both the position and the anchor point settings are changing. So see as I drag this around. And that's in order to allow us to keep the graphic exactly where it is, but change the position of the anchor point. The position settings are changing to compensate for the repositioning of the anchor point. I'm just going to reset all of the motion settings here again. So what are these numbers? Well, the position controls are the position relative to the sequence frame. This is a 1920 by 1080 HD sequence, and half of those numbers is 960 by 540. So this is the exact center of our frame. But the anchor point numbers are relative to the size of the layer, that is the graphic that we're adjusting. This graphic happens to be 500 pixels by 500 pixels. So halfway across and halfway down that is 250 pixels. So now I can click and drag or scrub across the horizontal position controls, or I can click and scrub across on the anchor point control. But you'll notice perhaps more easily if you do this yourself, that you're dragging the opposite direction to move the item horizontally. That's because when you adjust the position to create a bigger number, you're moving the anchor point across the screen. But when you move the anchor point, you're changing it in its relationship with the item. So a bigger number actually moves it further over to the right, which means the item itself moves further to the left. This is one of those things that's a little bit easier to understand by clicking and dragging yourself and seeing the result. Again, I'm going to reset the entire motion effect so that we've got our original position and anchor point controls. Now, just as you can animate clip volume and opacity using keyframes, you can actually animate any setting with a stopwatch icon in the Effect Controls panel, and that includes the position and anchor point controls. I want to animate the position of this graphic, and in fact I want it to start at 90 degrees and have it rotate on a corner into position. And to do this, I'm going to reposition the anchor point on one corner of the graphic. We could do this using the controls in the Effect Controls panel, and sometimes this is the only way to get precisely the effect you need, because you can click and type in exactly the numbers that you want. But there's a quicker way to achieve the correct positioning right in the program monitor. I'm going to set the playhead in the sequence where I want the animation to have finished, and just for the purposes of this tutorial I'll set it to around about 8 seconds, something like that. Now I'm going to enable animation for rotation, and you'll notice when I do that, a keyframe is added automatically at this point on the clip. Remember, we've got the graphic selected, not the video background. Anytime you enable keyframing in this way, a keyframe is added at that moment with the current settings. Now, just so you can see this a little more clearly, I'll go back to 100% zoom, and I'm going to select the motion heading in the Effect Controls panel so I can get access to the anchor point, and I'm going to click and drag it down to the bottom left corner. And as I do, I'm going to hold the control key here on Windows. This would be Command on Mac OS. And I haven't released anything yet. I've still got the mouse button held down and the control key or command key. And you'll notice that as I move the cursor to different areas of the layer of this graphic, the anchor point is snapping into these control points. And I want the bottom left corner control point. Now I'm going to release the mouse button, and then I'm going to release the control key. Of course, the position settings have been updated automatically. Now I'm going to move my playhead to about halfway up to that point, a few seconds earlier in the sequence, and I'm going to adjust the rotation. I'm going to drag here, back, and in fact I want this to be exactly minus 90 degrees. So I'm going to click on this number, I'm going to type in a hyphen, which is the minus key as well, and 90, and press enter. I'll just zoom back out to fit, and we can see the result. Because we've got animation turned on for rotation, you can see we've got a second keyframe as well. The location of this first keyframe is where I want another piece of motion to end. So I'm going to enable position keyframes, and so now we've got a turning point for this graphic. And I'll just scrub through so you can see the result of the animation. And because we've got our anchor point in the corner, we're rotating on that corner. Let's play that back. It's slow, but it works. Now I'm going to take the playhead to the beginning of the clip. I can do this up in the timeline in the Effect Controls panel or in the timeline panel. And because I've got animation turned on for position, I can just take the horizontal axis control here and drag left, and drag left, and drag left, until this graphic is off screen. And you can try this yourself. If you hold down the Shift key while you drag on these numbers, they change much faster. And now let's just scrub through and see the result. The graphic comes on and falls into position. Perfect. There are countless ways to combine position, rotation, and scale keyframes for that matter to produce results that are more interesting than simply fading a graphic on screen. But the principles are absolutely universal. As long as you understand the relationship between the position settings and the anchor point settings, you're free to experiment. For this tutorial, I'm using the Explore Bezier Keyframes project file. You can find that project file with the media associated with this tutorial. Just double-click on the project file to open it in Premiere Pro. I am in the Effects workspace, and you can choose that workspace by going to the Window menu and choosing Workspaces. And also you can reset the workspace by choosing Reset to Saved Layout. You can access the same option in the Panel menu in the Workspaces panel. I have a sequence set up here that already has some animation applied. I have this graphic that slides on screen at 90 degrees and then rotates on one corner and lands flat in the middle of the screen. This is an interesting way for the graphic to come on screen, but the movement doesn't look very natural. I'll just click back a little so you can see, and I'll play the motion. It's just a steady linear rotation on one corner. Definitely better than a static image that fades up, but not particularly exciting. So let's use Bezier keyframes to give the movement some momentum. So first of all, I need to have the graphic selected so I can see its settings in the Effect Controls panel. Right now, I've got two keyframes for position. We've got a start position off screen. I'll just click back to the previous keyframe to see it. And we've got one with our final position just a few seconds in. At the same moment, we've got our starting keyframe for rotation, which is set to minus 90 degrees. And the second keyframe for rotation sets us back to 0 degrees. And that's what gives us this movement. I want the graphic to look like it's falling when it comes to a stop, as if somehow the momentum of it sliding across the screen caused it to fall straight. I'm going to just expand the height of the rotation settings here a little so we can see the keyframes more clearly. And I can tell right away by looking at these icons that these are the default linear keyframes. A linear keyframe means that changes occur with consistent progress, and we want the rotation to accelerate and then come to a hard stop as if the graphic is falling, pulled by gravity. So I'm going to right-click on the second rotation keyframe, and from the list of available options, I'm going to choose Bezier. This changes the icon, but it also importantly gives me a Bezier handle. I'm going to use the navigator at the bottom of the Effect Controls panel to zoom in a little here so you can see that handle more clearly. If I play the result before I make any manual changes, you can see it's kind of an even smoother finish. It slows down towards the end. So I'm going to get a hold of this very small Bezier handle. In fact, let me just navigate left a little bit here, and I'm going to resize this so you can see more clearly. This line represents the adjustment over time, just as a volume rubber band does, or for that matter, an opacity rubber band. But of course, we're focusing on rotation. So I'm going to get this handle and I'm going to start to make an adjustment. Now, if I adjust too far, so I get this curve, well, take a look at what happens. If I scrub through here, you can see that we're actually going beyond the final keyframe setting. We're going as far as 28.7 degrees beyond our 0 point and then coming back. And that's no good at all. It's certainly an interesting movement if I play through here, but it's not what we're looking for. I can also use this Bezier handle to pull down. And again, I'm going to pull down so we get quite a sharp finish, but I don't want to pull down so far that this line dips below the original setting. And let's take a look at that. Well, it's pretty good. I like the acceleration, but that Bezier curve is giving us a slight backwards motion at the first keyframe. It kind of works in this example, but we could remove it by using an automated Bezier keyframe setting, the ease out. So I'm going to right-click on the first keyframe, and I'm going to choose ease out. And this will smooth out the movement. The ease out and ease in keyframes are Bezier keyframes that are already set up to give a smooth transition at the point of a keyframe, either leading up to the keyframe or playing from it. I'll just click back and play again, and let's take a look. Excellent. though we're still getting that backwards momentum. So let's take the handle of that first ease out keyframe and just stretch it out a little bit longer. This is going to smooth out the movement, although you can see if I just resize a little more, we're still getting a little bit of a backwards curve. So let's level that out and take another look. Great. Well, it's not exactly a natural curve because we've got this downward handle so steep now that it's forcing the acceleration into reverse. So I'm going to just shorten that handle to create more of an upward curve. And as you can see, the longer you make the handles, you just click and drag them, the longer the straight stretch of that rubber band. Let's click back and take another look. Excellent. Much more interesting. As you can see, adjusting keyframes using Bezier handles is both an art and a craft, and it inevitably takes a little bit of experimentation and practice and just trying things out to see that you get the result you want. For this tutorial, I'm using the Create Animated Effect Presets project file. You can find that project file with the media associated with this tutorial. Just double-click on the project file to open it in Premiere Pro. In Premiere Pro, I'm working in the Effects workspace, and you can reset that workspace by clicking on the panel menu in the Workspaces panel and choosing Reset to Saved Layout. I have a sequence with a background video clip and a square foreground graphic, and they both play for about 20 seconds. The graphic starts out rotated at -90 degrees, and it already has some animation applied, which gives it the impression of falling into position. It's a slow build-up, and then it accelerates and falls. Here in the Effect Controls panel, you can see the Bezier keyframes we set up to create this effect. If I look in my graphics bin, I actually have another series of graphics I'd like to incorporate into this sequence. I'll just double-click so you can see each of these is essentially the same design as the graphic we're currently using in the sequence, but they have different text at the top. I want to apply the same animation to each of these graphics, and to do that I can copy and paste, but I can also create an effect preset. So I'm going to go back to my Effect Controls panel, and I'm going to select this Iceland graphic.psd so I can see the controls for that clip in the Effect Controls panel. And now I'm going to right-click on this motion heading, and I'm going to choose Save Preset. I get the option to name the preset, so let's call this Fall on Screen. And I have to decide what I want to happen to the timing for the keyframes. If you choose the Scale option, and you put this effect preset onto a shorter or a longer clip, then the timing of the keyframes will adjust to suit. Let's choose this first of all, and I'll name this preset Scale. I'll click OK, and I'll take one of these graphics and put it on screen. By default, this has a 5-second duration because that's the default setting in the user preferences, much shorter than this graphic. I'm going to go to my Effects panel and expand the presets, and here's my Fall on-Screen Scale preset. And I can see that I've got a little bit of a minor typo there. I've got capital letters at the beginnings of these words and not in the middle, so I can right-click and choose Preset Properties, and I can modify anything I want in these settings. I'll just add a capital O and click OK. Now I'm going to drag this preset onto the new graphic. And remember, this has got the keyframes set to scale their timing. So now, if I click to the beginning of the clip and play, it comes on screen faster and falls faster. In fact, knowing the relative durations of these graphics, I know that it's about 4 times faster. Now, I'm going to move the original graphic out of the way for a moment. I want to keep hold of it because we're going to use that preset again in just a second. I'm going to drag this new graphic over to the beginning of the sequence so we can see it against that video backdrop. And I'm going to select all of the remaining 3 graphics and I'm going to drag them into position on video 2. I just used the control key there, that'll be the command key on macOS, to make a multiple clip selection. Now that I'm happy with the timing of this effect preset, and especially knowing that it's a scaled timing effect, I'm going to make a marquee selection for these remaining 3 graphics, and I'm going to drag the preset onto any one of them. This is going to apply the preset to all 3. And now if I play, you can see this graphic slides on, the next slides on, and so on. But let's say I prefer the timing with these shorter clips to the timing on that longer clip. This is taking 4 times as long to slide on screen and fall. Well, I can just select one of these clips, right-click, Save Preset, and I'll call this Fall On Screen Fixed Time. And now I'm going to choose one of these other options. If I choose Anchor to Endpoint, then the precise timing of the keyframes will be set starting with the beginning of the clip. If I choose Anchor to Outpoint, well, the same principle applies, but now the timing of the keyframes will be set in relation to the end of the clip. And I suppose you would use the Anchor to Endpoint option for transition effects where an item comes into the screen, and Anchor to Outpoint for transition effects when an item is going out of the screen. And I can put in a description. Well, I can't be sure it's the most wonderful transition, but it'll do for our purposes. I'm going to choose the Anchor to Endpoint option and click OK. Now we've got both options on our presets list, and if I hover the mouse cursor over this second option, you can see the description pops up as well. But I've got a bit of a dilemma. What am I going to do with this original timing on this Iceland graphic clip? You can't remove the motion effect. It's a fixed effect, sometimes called an intrinsic effect. But it turns out it doesn't matter. You can only have one motion effect applied to any clip on the timeline in Premiere Pro. And so I can either drag the clip into the sequence again and start fresh, or I can just turn off all of the keyframe options here in the Effect Controls panel, reset the motion effect so everything is back to default, and then drag this new preset down onto the clip. Because this preset has the keyframes anchored to the beginning of the clip, the timing now matches the other 4 graphics that I've added to the sequence. It's important to consider the image size when applying motion effect presets, but most of the time you'll find the presets will work without any adjustments at all. Having said that, of course, regardless of which preset you're using, all of the settings are editable. You'll notice that the motion effect heading in the Effect Controls panel now shows the name of the preset. That really is just for information purposes, so you know how you began with the effects applied to this clip. For this tutorial, I'm using the Looping Animated Backgrounds Premiere Pro project file. You can find that project file with the media associated with this tutorial. Just double-click on the project file to open it in Premiere Pro. In Premiere Pro, I'm using the Effects workspace, and you can reset that workspace by clicking on the panel menu and choosing Reset to Saved Layout. I've got a sequence here that contains just a graphic which animates on screen, but there's nothing behind it, and I want to have a background. I'll just play this so you can see. There's our simple animation, and though you can't see that the background to the timeline is transparent because by default it comes through as black, if I click on the settings menu here in the program monitor, I can turn on the transparency grid and you can see what's going on more clearly. I'll just turn that off for now. And let's see if we can generate a background that'll be a little more interesting. I'm going to begin by creating a black color matte, so I'll just resize the project panel a little here so we can see all of the buttons at the bottom of the panel. I'm going to click on the new item menu and I'm going to choose color matte. By default, the new color matte will be based on the current sequence settings. So we've got the width and height and time base and so on set correctly. I'll click OK. We can choose a color with a standard color picker and I'll click OK again because I'm happy with black. I'll type in the name background and click OK. And here is our background color matte in the project panel. Color mattes in Premiere Pro work the same way as any kind of graphic. So if I drag this into my sequence on the video 1 track under the graphic, well, of course, you're not going to see anything because it's a black color matte and there's a black background. Rather than trim the background right the way out to the duration of the graphic, instead, we're going to apply a looping effect so we can duplicate the graphic and use it again and again in multiple sequences and keep the timing of the loop. So I'm going to set a specific duration instead. I'm going to right click on the background and I'm going to choose speed duration. I'm going to make sure the chain link is off between the speed control and the duration. Because this is a graphic, the speed options grayed out anyway. But still, I'm going to click into the duration box and I'm going to type in 1000. I don't need any punctuation because Premiere Pro is going to put that in for me automatically. If I just click away from the box, you can see now this is 10 seconds. And I'll click OK, and there's our 10-second background clip, which is just a black color matte. I'm also going to turn off visibility for video 2 so we can see what we're working on more clearly, and I'll resize this a little bit so we get a thumbnail. Now, I'll position the playhead at the very beginning of the sequence, and over in my effects panel, I'm going to search for the cell pattern effect. I'm just typing in cell in the search box. I'll drag this onto the clip, and immediately you can see we've got this very interesting cellular pattern. If I play the sequence a little, you can see that actually the cell pattern's not animating at all. It's a static image. I'll just stop that and reposition my playhead at the beginning of the clip. The cell pattern effect has quite a few options, and I think the best way to learn how to use this effect is to work your way through them and just drag them from one end to the other. Here, for example, if I drag the contrast all the way down, you can see we get a completely grey image, and if I drag it all the way up, I get a much stronger black and white effect. I'm going to reset that. And the control I'm really interested in is this one, evolution. I'm going to turn on animation for this control. And this is going to add a keyframe. You can just about see here at the beginning of the little mini timeline inside the effect controls panel. Now I'm going to make sure the timeline panel is active. I've just clicked on it once, and I'm going to press the down arrow to move to the end of this background clip. In fact, what I've really done is I've moved to the frame just after it. The down arrow and up arrow will always move you to the first frame of a clip, not the last frame. In this case, there is no clip after the background color matte, so we're just at the beginning of the blank space. However, we still have the background clip selected, so if I add a keyframe, it's actually going to be applied to this background clip, even though it's beyond the end of the clip. And this is important because it allows for more advanced animation options. Let me scroll down just a little bit here so I can expand the evolution options. There we go, a little bit more. And I'm going to set the number of evolutions to 6, and I'm going to type an X. This is 6 times. I'll press enter here, and you can see that's come up. That's 6 full evolutions on that last keyframe. These evolutions are changes to the pattern effect. We're going to turn on cycle evolution so that it loops, and we want the number of cycles to align with the number of evolutions so that we can loop the clip cleanly. I'm going to choose 2 because 2 goes evenly into 6. Now, because we've got a clean number of evolutions and cycles in this effect on that last keyframe, the clip is actually going to end up looking the same at the end as it does at the beginning. I'll just drag back a little bit so you can see this, and I'll play a little of the effect. It's a very interesting result. Now that we have a perfectly looping clip, we can begin to duplicate it. I'm going to hold the Alt key here on Windows, this would be the Option key on macOS, and drag the clip along on the timeline until it snaps into position so it perfectly aligns with the previous copy of the clip. I'm going to do that again. I'm holding down Alt or Option, creating a copy, release the Alt key, and snap back. Now the graphic happens to be exactly 30 seconds, so we've got a perfectly aligned background to our foreground graphic. Now let's add a color change. Again, I'm going to position my playhead at the beginning of the sequence. I'm going to select the first instance of this background clip, And I'm going to switch over to our color workspace, and I'll just reset that workspace to be on the safe side. And here in the Lumetri color panel, I'll expand the basic correction, and I'll just pull this over towards the blue. I'm being pretty lazy here, but you can see the result. I'm going to go to my Effect Controls panel. I want to make sure I've got this background layer selected. Let's collapse the cell pattern settings for a moment. Expand the basic correction for the Lumetri color effect. And remember, the controls you see here in the Effect Controls panel are literally the same ones as the ones you can access quickly in the Lumetri color panel. Here's my temperature setting that I've just modified, and I'm going to turn on animation for that setting. We've now got a keyframe at the beginning of the clip. Back in the timeline panel, I'm just clicking to make it active. I'm going to press the down arrow once, and I've got a problem because when you switch to the color workspace, Premiere Pro automatically enables this option under the sequence menu. Selection follows playhead. By pressing the down arrow, I've moved the playhead onto the next clip, and of course that means we've selected the next clip. But that's okay. I'll just select the first clip again. Our playhead is still in position. And I'm going to click to add a keyframe for this temperature control. So we've got the same setting at the beginning and end of the clip. And I can go to the middle of the clip. I'm just doing this approximately. And I'll warm up that color temperature. Let's push this over to the orange. Now, as I scrub through here, you can see we're going blue, orange, blue. And we're back to the original uncolored version straight after that. I'm going to remove these copies. I'm hitting the backspace key here. I'll take this original, which now has the color effect on it, and I'll alt drag this, snap it into position, alt drag, snap it into position. Now, because again, with the color temperature adjustment, I set the keyframes to be just after the end of the clip, which happens to align with the very beginning of the next clip, we're going to have beautifully looping color, and all of these cell pattern effects are going to merge from one into the other. I'll just turn on visibility for the graphic, and I'll play across one of these edits so you can see the result. So we have this seamless join both in the animation of the cell pattern and in the animation of the color. So that's how you can create a looping animated background in Adobe Premiere Pro CC. For this tutorial, I'm using the Animate a Layered Title Fly-In project file. You can find that project file with the media associated with this tutorial. Just double-click on the project file to open it in Premiere Pro. I'm in the Effects workspace, and you can reset that workspace by clicking on the Panel menu and choosing Reset to Saved Layout. I've got a sequence with a background photo, and I want to use a Photoshop document as the opening title for this new sequence. When working with Photoshop files, it's quite possible that changes will be made even though the file's already incorporated into a sequence, and this is absolutely fine. I'm going back to my media folder, and I'm going into my graphics folder, and I'm going to drag this graphic into Premiere Pro. This is a self-contained file, so I don't really need to use the media browser panel. In Premiere Pro, I get the Import Layered File dialog box, and instead of choosing the option to merge all layers, I'm going to choose the sequence option. This way, each layer will already be on its own track, which will save me a little bit of time later on. I'll click OK, and there's the newly imported graphic, which has all of the individual layers and the sequence with the same name as the graphic, all ready to use. I'll just double click to open that up, and we can see each of those layers, and there's the complete graphic. It doesn't really have a black background, that's just the background of the timeline, but if it did, I could always strip that out easily by selecting it and removing it. I'll just reposition the split here between the video and audio tracks. You can see I've got 8 video tracks altogether. I'm going to select all of these, and then I can press Ctrl-C or Command-C on macOS, or I can right-click as I'm here and choose Copy. I'm going to go back to my master sequence. I'm going to turn off video 1 and turn on video 2, and I'm going to paste. In this case, I'm going to use Ctrl-V or Command-V on macOS, and I've got all of those tracks added to my sequence. You'll notice that we didn't have a video 7, 8, or 9 and so on before we added these clips, but because they were needed, Premiere Pro has added them automatically. We could edit the PSD sequence into the master sequence as a nest, but to illustrate this workflow, we're going to work on the individual clips in position so you can see what's happening. I'll just scroll back down a little on the timeline again, and because I have all the clips selected, as I trim, they're all going to trim out together to the full duration of that photo. So there's our finished composition with the graphic in front of the photo background. I want to begin by positioning my playhead in the sequence at the final resting position, the point at which my graphic should be fully visible and in position on screen. And then I'm going to animate each of the individual layers so that they merge into position. I'm going to position the playhead around about 3 seconds. I think something like that is ideal. Because each of the layers of the original PSD has its own track, you can see it's pretty easy for me to selectively turn these off and on. But it's also easy for me to animate them independently. So I'm going to select the first clip on the video 2 track. I'll just click outside of the clip first to deselect all of them, and then click on that clip. I'm going to go to my Effect Controls panel, and I'm going to turn on Animation for Position. This adds a keyframe at the current location of the playhead. As well as using Bezier keyframes to change the timing of edits, we can also use them to change the path clips follow as they animate across the screen. I'm going to right-click on this newly created keyframe, and first I'll choose Temporal Interpolation and Ease In. And this will give us a smooth ease into position for our animation. Now that I've got my end position keyframe set up, I'm going to right-click on the Motion Effect heading in the Effect Controls panel, and I'm going to choose Copy. I'll position my playhead at the beginning of the sequence, double-click on the name of the sequence, which is effectively the name of the panel here, so it's full screen. Select all of the other clips, and I'm going to press Ctrl-V or Command-V on macOS to apply the motion effect settings to all of these clips. And then I'll just double-click on the panel name again to return it to its original frame size. You'll notice that the effects badge has lit up in yellow to show that there is an effect applied. Though, if I click away and click back again, you can see nothing's really set up to animate. We've just set the final resting position with a keyframe for each of these clips. I'm going to just pull this dividing line down a little bit more and shrink the video 1 track so we can just see these graphics. And I want to trim the start of each of these clips to a different time so that they come on screen separately. Because we pasted a version of the motion effect onto each of these clips that has animation enabled, every change we make is going to add keyframes from now on. So let's just trim and trim and trim, just to give these different layers slightly different timing. Now I'm going to turn on all of the track selection buttons by holding down the Shift key while I click on one of them, and I can use the up and down arrows to jump between the beginnings of these clips. That's just useful for setting my first keyframe for the animation I'm going to apply. I'm going to change the zoom on my program monitor down to 25% because I want to be able to drag these items off from the frame. And so I'll start at the beginning. I'm pressing the up arrow. I'll select this first clip, select the motion heading, and let's just pull this off over here. Select the timeline panel, press the down arrow to go to the next clip, select it, select the motion heading, drag this one up here, and I'm going to keep doing that as I work my way through each of these clips. You can double-click on the image to jump into these direct controls in the program monitor. But doing so only really works conveniently if you manage to click on the right pixels, which is easier to do if you've got a full screen image. A little bit more difficult if you're working with individual layers. Okay, there we go. Let's take a look at the result. I'm setting the program monitor back to fit. Great. Certainly there's more I could do with that. I can add more adjustment to the path that the layers take, but it's a bit more interesting than a static image. Although we've now added animation and worked with these individual layers separately in Premiere Pro, we're still actually displaying the contents of the original Photoshop document. So any changes to it, like changing the colors or positions of the elements, will dynamically update inside of Premiere Pro every time they're saved.